Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on managing teams in the new normal. We're delighted to welcome Eileen Donnelly from Ripple & Co. to join us today to talk to us about the challenges we're currently facing as managers and as teams. We're going to be looking at the strategies and tools that managers can utilize to help their team adjust. And we're going to talk about why going the extra mile will give managers the best possible chance of having a motivated team. But before we start, just a few bits of housekeeping. You should have received an email from us yesterday or early this morning about the guidelines for the webinars. You're all on mute at the moment, and that will stay the case right the way through the webinar. If you have any questions or you have a problem with sound, please make a note in the chat. You should be able to find a chat box on your screen. It's the one that looks like a little speech bubble, if you like. So if you click on that, you should be able to get into chat. We'll be using a tool called Menti this afternoon because this is going to be a nice interactive session for you. Eileen's going to ask you a few little questions, nothing difficult, it's not a test. And it's also confidential, so your responses, though they're not in any way intrusive, your responses will be kept confidential. We are recording this webinar, so if you miss anything or have to dash out in the middle for whatever reason, rest assured you will be able to get into it again and see what's said. So there's no need to make notes. At the end of today or possibly tomorrow, we'll be sending you out a Seeker briefing note, which covers some of the stuff that we're going to be covering today, and also a link to Ripple & Co.'s Managing Remotely guide. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box. We will pick them up and the questions will all be answered, hopefully, at the end of the session. In the meantime, I'm delighted to pass you over to Eileen, who's going to lead us today. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Bryony, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Just a little bit about me, so you know who is going to be with you for this next hour. My career has been predominantly in-house in corporate, so I've spent around about 20 years working in the field of corporate responsibility and sustainability, latterly as a director in a global FTSE 250. But about 3 years ago, I stepped out of the comfort, if that's what you want to call it, of the corporate sector, and actually founded my own business, Ripple & Co. And the focus for Ripple & Co. is very much the key responsibility of investment in human capital. Companies often say that employees are their greatest asset. Well, let's face it, they are the most expensive as well. So why not invest in them in the right ways? And then through that, you can realize their true potential, and particularly in the uncertain times that we're in now, actually improve their resilience and thereby future-proof your business. So we're going to have a look at specifically what we mean by managing teams and investing time and resource and energy in getting the best out of our teams. But as Bryony said, we're going to use a tool called Menti. So let's give that a bit of a practice now. So if you've never used it before, let's give this a go for the first time. But a very, very simple question, which hopefully no one can get wrong at this stage. Could you go to menti.com, which hopefully you have open in another device, and by using that code, just write in what is your job title. And I'm really hoping, it's the first time I've used it, I'm really hoping a lovely word cloud. Aha, there we go. Will start to appear and change as you input the answer to that question. Just give that a few more seconds. Great. So actually a nice mix there. training manager is staying there front and center. But in a sense, I guess if we're managing teams, there's an element of training in everybody's role. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, so a really nice mix. Thank you very much for that. Hopefully we're going to enjoy using Menti 3 times more in the webinar. That's just going to keep growing, isn't it? That's really exciting. Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do first off is I'm going to paint the picture of the context within which we're talking about. And I'll do that by looking at the macro environment first, then the internal, and then the personal. So first off, that macro environment. So let's look at the economic impact that we have been experiencing as a result of the pandemic. So the spring 2020 GDP forecast for growth across 27 European states, so I haven't included all of them here, the forecast was 1.2% growth this year. Now you can see that is clearly not what we've been experiencing at all. The economy has had all sorts of negative impacts on it. The pandemic really has wrought some havoc on growth, and we're looking on average of a contraction of 7.4%. Now, if this isn't quite your thing in terms of macroeconomic figures, let me put that into perspective for you. In the financial crisis of 2009, the decline suffered collectively across the EU was 4.5. So it is some way bigger than that. And just to draw that down into a little bit of detail, what does this look like for construction? So 57% have already reported a decrease in turnover across all of these different industries, slightly higher for construction, 59.4% decrease in turnover so far because of the pandemic. Again, the macro environment, we as employees and as companies, what have we been seeing? A whole host of high percentage closures of retail and leisure outlets, the out-of-town units, the high street's been shutting down, the shopping centres have closed. And of course, we saw that in some of the panic buying. And it's worth just resting on that word panic. It comes from fear of the unknown. What does this mean for me? So the macro environment, which had all this fear put into it, sent shoppers wild. In that first week, they were shopping for medicines, cleaning supplies, tissues, and fresh meat substitutes and canned meat. And it looks like those purchases were far more than the usual because the sales of reusable shopping bags increased by 177%. In week 2, we then started going for key pantry items. That's perhaps when the loo roll thing started happening. Emergency health and personal care products, shelf staples, and children's medicines increased by 124%. So that's a bit more of the macro environment, but let's look at the internal environment in terms of companies. Well, in 2019, only 30% of employees had ever worked from home, and that jumped to 60%, and then forced work from home situation. Now, let's face it, not every company is going to have the infrastructure to enable that first off. I was working with a client who could only give laptops to 10% of their workforce. So a massive impact on them. Potentially the communication channels aren't there. And maybe the culture of trust to really enable working from home and management of employees from home, maybe that wasn't there for some people as well. So more specifically, breaking this down across different industries, what did this look like in terms of working from home? There was actually less than 0.5% of the construction workforce who were working from home, but still a significant number. And then latterly, the personal environment. So I've taken a whole bunch of different headlines. We were all aware of Boris Johnson's announcement, of course, the strict lockdown across the country, and then our constant daily updates of the death toll. Then that was swiftly followed by the idea that the NHS might actually become overwhelmed and not be able to cope. Then we started hearing about the Nightingale hospitals, but alongside that was the idea that actually we won't have enough PPE. Excuse me. So what was that going to mean for our frontline workers? Then we started to have the challenge not only of working from home, but also the fact that our children were then going to be home with us indefinitely, and exams were going to be cancelled. So all sorts of disruptions happening to our personal lives. Fear of becoming ill, fear of isolation, fear for our loved ones, our families becoming unwell. And really what we started to appreciate is the fact that we had no control over the environment within which we were working. And then perhaps to make matters even worse, we didn't know when it was going to end. We still don't know when it's going to end. And companies are starting to look at maybe just not returning to the normal workspace that we've been used to. The Slater and Gordon, the law firm, decided at the end of May that after their leases ended on their building in London, they're going to close it. They're not going to go back to it. And they're reviewing all of their physical asset, their offices around the UK. Siemens, flexibly, you can work from home minimum 2-3 days a week. So it's really changing our working patterns. And what was once seen as perhaps a benefit of being able to work from home is now being seen as a given, that your employer should enable that. And some employees can obviously prove that they're more productive as well. Now, the personal environment also includes something that we hold very, very dear, the uncertainty around our time off, our holidays. So huge amounts of impacts. What I want us to do now is just have a little reflection. And if you would put your answers in again on Menti, what has been your biggest challenge, your personal challenge, your work challenge, whatever it's been, but your biggest challenge during lockdown? I think you might be able to put more than one answer in here if you want to as well. Has it been the lack of connection? Has it been internet? Has it been children? You just throw some words out there and hopefully we'll see another word cloud appear. Children not in school. I'm going to empathize with that one. Yep. Switching off from work. Yeah, our schedules has extended somewhat. Workspace. Do we have one? Do we have a dedicated workspace? Domesticity. Loneliness. Children. Concentration. Missing personal contact. Theatre. Thank you. Disruptions in internet. Yeah, lots and lots. Boredom, lone working, cabin fever. Working whilst teaching. Yeah, I know people who have literally sat at the same table and trying to do teaching and lessons at the same time as doing work. Kids face bombing your webinars. Thankfully, mine are out walking, so we shouldn't get that today. There are lots and lots of challenges. Staying focused. Yeah, so we're going to deep dive into some of these. They're all real. They're all very, very subjective, but they're all very, very real. Thank you for that. So with that in mind, it's no wonder that actually we found it really hard. We found this very, very hard. The Dunkirk spirit of this is great, we'll get through it, we'll all pull together, it's kind of faded a little bit. And we're now feeling a little bit more isolated, starting to notice that our focus is dwindling. So our staying focused and motivated was worse in June than it was in April. So as time is going on, we're finding this more and more difficult. Distractions. So the first two there, staying motivated and distractions. So of course, this is what we're experiencing, but it's also what our colleagues are experiencing as well. Now, of course, there are positives, and I get that. In fact, one of the positives, on average, we're saving about £44.78 by cutting out things like commuting and buying lunch on a weekly basis. So hey ho, we've got another nearly £45 in our pocket. I'm not sure it's worth it, but let's have a look. So this is the breakdown of working conditions that our employees have by age profile. So those in yellow are likely balancing their laptops on their laps, sitting on a sofa. Those who have got the desk lamp have got a dedicated workspace. So there's a real difference. There's a real split in those who are working in a dedicated space or a dedicated office, even better, and those who don't have that privilege. And it has a massive, massive impact. This is the kind of impact that we're seeing as a result of the different spaces that people are operating in. So whilst 2/3 are saying they are more productive working from home, and one of the main reasons for that will be the ability to have a better work-life balance, actually, as this period of time extends, it shifts. And one in 5 remote workers are now saying that they're struggling with loneliness. So I think some of the things we're seeing on the left-hand side with those who do have a dedicated workspace, actually we'll see it creeping more into those who are saying, actually, I don't really like this. I miss seeing my colleagues. I miss having the social environment of work. Now, CIPD has done some research that says, on average, in lockdown, employees have worked an additional 29 hours every month. Now, that's going to lead to one thing if that continues: burnout. You get a reduction in work-life balance, and just this inability, as some of you were saying, this inability to switch off. You get a system overload. So how long can we do this and expect as much out of ourselves and out of our team? There are a lot of inequalities in this as well. So it's been shown that women and those from ethnic minorities have been the most affected. Now, that's not across the board, and I get it. We have different roles within the home, but in general, we are seeing women and ethnic minorities struggle the most. What the pandemic has done is just emphasized inequalities. So I think, you know, this kind of sums it up, really. We're not working from home. You're at home during a crisis, and in that crisis, you're trying to work. And if this is the way it's going to stay for a while or indefinitely, then we need to find the best way through this and actually realize the value that you can get from working from home. Now, obviously, not everybody is working. So I just want to mention people in our team are still in our team, even if they're furloughed, and they have significant amount of anxiety. So 9.3 million workers have been furloughed, and 81% of them fear future redundancy. Many of them feel disconnected with the workforce. 63% are concerned about the loss of connection with a company, and 60% are concerned about the loss of connection with team and colleagues. Now, as a manager, that is your responsibility. You can talk to furloughed staff. Furloughed staff can even train. They're just not allowed to do any work. So stress and anxiety has definitely increased within our workforce, furloughed or not, during the pandemic. Over 65% are worried about the future because, of course, it's so uncertain. 67.7% are feeling stressed or anxious about everything or some things, whether it be financial, getting sick, loved ones being sick. And 57% say that COVID is actually impacting their work. And I don't think that is a surprise, but that's something that we obviously have to deal with in our teams. Now, stress in itself isn't a mental health condition, but of course it can lead to it. Over time, it is very closely linked to mental ill health if not addressed. There's a big difference between worry and stress, of course, and continual stress and continual anxiety will lead to a mental health condition. So it plays a really key role. So on to the next question. What has been the biggest challenge in managing your team remotely? So if you put some ideas down there about, since lockdown, since we haven't been connected, what has been the challenges around connecting in with people, visibility of productivity, connectivity issues? Yeah. Do we know how they're doing? Have we asked them? Honesty, yeah. Disappearing colleagues, poor performance. We are working better. Goes both ways. Really interesting. Yeah. I've heard someone say that their more introverted colleagues have actually been the ones who've actually come online and chatted in the team socials. But not everyone is experiencing that. Coffee break chats. There's something called the intensification of work when you're working from home. Group chats, hearing, brilliant, yeah. Well-being. Cameras on, cameras off. Yeah, what do you do when someone just turns their camera off? Yeah, face-to-face communication, working too many hours, this idea of intensification. Our schedules, definitely, we've seen a trend where our days are getting longer. Now, ideally, our days are getting longer because we're perhaps taking a better lunch break and we're sitting down with our family at lunch. Maybe we're taking a break in the afternoon. Maybe we're trying to work because we want to do some childcare responsibilities in the middle of the day. But for others, maybe it's just an extended day. And that's going to have an impact on us ultimately. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Now, one of the things that is coming out there is around performance, productivity. Now, we already had a productivity problem. As Andy Haldane, who's the chief economist at the Bank of England, said at a talk I was listening to in January, before any of this came about, the productivity crisis in the UK is the signature economic challenge. So we're looking at the last time it was so low was in the 1880s. So this is significant. And what has productivity looked like during the pandemic? For some, it's improved. It absolutely has improved because working from home can do that. It's been proven. When you get that work-life balance, you work better. But for others, it hasn't. And if you look at those two top in the bar chart in terms of staying focused and motivated and distractions, productivity is going to dip. So he talks about something he calls efficiency work theory. Quite simply, if you have good quality work, it leads to increased productivity. Now, there are key elements as to what quality work looks like. If you get them right, and we don't have time to go into all of those now, but if you get those right, then your productivity will increase. Now, I think that is gut reaction, gut instinct would tell us that if we're able to give quality work to our employees, then of course they'll work better. But thankfully, we have evidence to prove it as well. So this was a study done and published last year, and it was done by the Oxford Research Centre that has beautifully linked productivity to well-being. And interestingly, the tracking that they did was actually on happiness. They did it in a wonderfully large sample of 1 million workers, which in research terms is a phenomenal sample size. They did it over 6 months, and on a weekly basis, they tracked the BT call centre workers' feelings with emoji buttons, very simply from very unhappy to very happy. And what they found was that when employees were happier, they worked better. And they actually saw an increase in sales of 13%, which I'm sure most of you would be jolly happy with in your businesses. So it's not about spending more time at work or working harder if you're at home. It's actually about being more efficient and productive. And what was even more interesting in this study is that those calls, the calls that the BT workers were making, when they were a bit more complex, so for example, retaining an unsatisfied customer, you'd have to use a more emotional intelligence. They actually saw a real uptake in or an increase in their ability to deal with the more complex sales. So this isn't just about becoming salespeople. This is about actually people are more likely to be able to employ their emotional intelligence if they're actually feeling good about themselves. So some really interesting statistics there to directly link productivity to well-being. So how can we affect well-being then? How can we ensure the well-being of our employees? So our well-being falls into 5 key buckets when it comes to the workplace. We've got health, security, environment, relationships, and purpose. And health and relationships are right up there at the top. These were developed with some really strong and consistent evidence from multiple large-scale scientific studies. So we really can trust these. So relationships, the social aspects of our work are really, really important. And how do we replicate those when it comes to working remotely? So why relationships? Well, let me just show you something else from the Oxford Research Centre. So this was done the year before on what were the drivers of job satisfaction. Interpersonal relationships, absolutely top, and then interesting job, and then pay. And obviously this is when pay is deemed to be fair. If your pay is not good, then it clearly is going to come higher up. So we know, therefore, that relationships are really, really important. And I'm going to argue clearly that the relationship with the manager is the most important relationship that you can possibly have at work. You don't leave a job, you leave a manager. So you as the managers are critical for the well-being, motivation, engagement, and therefore productivity of your team. And that really comes down to your style of management and how you engage with them and how you communicate with them. So I think we could probably bucket motivation of employees into 3 areas. 1, people like authority. They like to believe and trust in their leaders. Now, their leaders need to not seize power, but actually share it. So it's not about micromanagement. It's about trusting and empowering, but it's also about being clear about what's expected. And that's really important during the pandemic times. What is expected of your employees? The next is values. People like to feel that they're aligned, that they're running with their tribe. This idea of belonging, an identity to belonging to a group. And that's one of the contributors that work does for us. It gives us an identity. We belong to a group who are working towards a common goal. So this idea of creating communities with a common cause. And then, of course, we want to have some selfishness in there as well. What's selfishly our purpose in belonging to that tribe? So it might be our aspirations, our ambitions, our belief in ourselves. And I know what my role is, so that can enable me to grow in my contribution to the group goals. Now, we can map these across, well, actually, Maslow's hierarchy of needs has actually been translated by Tony Robbins, love him or hate him. And they map quite nicely across to what he has said are those kind of that hierarchy of needs. So we need variety in our roles, but we do like certainty of what's expected of us. We like to feel connected into the group. We want to be able to connect to it, but we like to feel our own self-significance and also know that we're growing. And all of these contribute to our productivity and our well-being in the workplace. Now, a Gallup meta-analysis backs up this thinking. During high stress times, the management approach needs to go back to the basics of clarifying expectations, reviewing what is needed, and then readjusting roles if necessary so people can continue to contribute, feel they're contributing, and also potentially develop in that as well. So there's a lot of evidence that this is a foundation of how to create good quality work that will motivate the workforce. If we move to a role that has none of these or fewer than these, then absolutely our job satisfaction will fall. So management practices are absolutely key. So you've got a QR code here to the and a link to the guide that you can download on managing practices. Just to give you an example of a study to really emphasize how important management practices are. There was some research done with NHS trusts, and they found that trusts that had what they deemed to be good management practices were over 3 times more likely to have lower levels of sickness absence, at least 4 times more likely to have satisfied patients, so read customers, more than twice as likely to have staff with the highest levels of job satisfaction, and over 3 times more likely to have the highest levels of staff engagement. Now, Google has done some research. It spent a couple of years researching what does actually make for successful remote team working. And it came up with 3 things. Keep it personal. Get to know your employees in a way which perhaps you wouldn't even do in the workplace, where actually it's easier to do it. But get to know the circumstances of how they're working, should they be willing to share. Empathize with them. This is not easy for some people. So find out what they're struggling with or what some of their challenges are. Google have this thing called the T check-in, TEA, thoughts, energy, and attention. And the question that managers could be asking is, where are your thoughts, your energy, and attention focused today and for the rest of the week? And that just gives you a little bit of an idea, particularly if you encourage them to talk outside of the workspace as well. So what is happening for you for this week? You are in people's homes. You're in my home right now. You must embrace them as the whole person. So empathize with some of the challenges they may be facing. Now, this is very much about adopting a coaching style. So you're delving into the emotional and psychological state. And I'm encouraging you to do that on a very, very regular basis. For some, you may know them already in your team. You need to help them turn up the positivity. It's very easy to get into a downward spiral and the glass is half empty. Can you identify some of these people and make sure that you bring them up so they don't bring everybody else down? Secondly, set clear boundaries. Now, this might be about ensuring they understand that they're not expected to answer emails whenever they're sent out. What is an appropriate response time? What is deemed to be out of hours? Because quite often I think people are just leaving their laptops on. Meetings. Who should and shouldn't join the meetings? I've seen an absolute trend for it's so easy to invite every Tom, Dick and Harry to virtual meetings because it's as easy as clicking a button and suddenly you're connected. Does everybody need to be at that meeting? And then also helping people to stay connected. So this is going to be connected to you, connected to each other, and then connected to the vision and the purpose. What is their work contributing to the greater purpose? And build trust with them through the communication of that purpose as well, re-emphasizing and celebrate the successes. Perhaps it's not as easy to do that when you're not actually in the workplace with them. But this new normal is here to stay for a jolly long time. And I think it's about making sure we adapt to that. And maybe we need to actually look at who we are as leaders. What is our leadership style? So there's all sorts of different profile tools that you can use. I use something called See Me, which looks at your behavior rather than you as an actual personality. But I've put a few down here, which it's worth seeing if you can identify with some of them and then reflect on the positive and the negative. So an achiever is someone, you're very driven, you're going to win at all costs, you cut through the noise, you're great at motivating. But you're frightened of failure. You drive to exhaustion. Do you drive others to exhaustion? Do you get frustrated when people don't move as quickly as you? The hero always steps up. When others don't know what to do, the hero is in there, very positive, tackling multiple tasks at the same time. But do you take on more than necessary? Do you perhaps not trust other people to do it because you're the person who is the hero? You rarely get a break when you're a hero. Or are you a lone wolf, highly capable, develop excellent solutions, and you don't need much support? But you don't allow other people to support you, to work with you. You don't delegate. You don't enable the team to work together. The mentor, a very nice leadership style, but very collaborative, offering support, but then you perhaps don't put the personal boundaries in. So by the end of the day, you haven't actually done your work because you're helping everybody else. The analyst, brilliant at creating success by mitigating the risks. You've got a plan B, you've got a plan C, and you'll identify all the potential failure points. But it's all about the detail, box checking rather than stopping at an answer and thinking, we've got as far as we need to go, now we can move on. Similar to the perfectionist in a way, very good at communicating complex concepts, great, beautifully designed documents, but maybe you spend too long on stuff when actually a draft will do. So what are the people like in your team, and how does your leadership style impact them? Because that's what this is about. Your followers will more likely follow you willingly if they know that you're adapting to them as much as they're having to adapt to you at the same time. Now, I think the biggest issue that we have faced, the biggest challenge has definitely been communication. And top of the list, I'm going to put, you just don't have the informal face-to-face. You can't offer immediate advice and help. You can't role model in the same way. You can't see the way people are working because, let's face it, it's probably going to be very different than the way they worked in the office. You can't ask those informal questions. Whenever someone asks you a question now, it's a bigger deal. It's a Zoom call or it's an email rather than just a quick question across the corridor. Obviously, the lack of social support and response times can be a lot longer as well. So we've seen some significant issues around communication, but there are opportunities in this as well. So the adaptation that is needed, first and foremost, is going to be, how would you normally talk to someone? in all the different ways, all the different opportunities and needs for communication almost need to be mapped out. How would I normally talk to this person? So it's not about having a team meeting and a one-to-one. It's trying to find, okay, not spontaneous, but trying to find all those opportunities to talk to your employees in the way that you would have done, but you now have to actually schedule them in. And yes, whilst it does lose the spontaneity, it means that you get that opportunity to offer support and assistance. You can do the check-ins on how are they doing, giving them feedback, talking about their personal development. And then many companies, of course, are doing the more social engagement as well. Some of it forced, others is the spontaneous, let's have a Friday afternoon chat. But it's critical to do this communication in a way which is less spontaneous, but is making you're covering all the different ways that you would normally talk to this person and the team within the office. And then more specifically, ideally, give people an option between the video calls and the phone calls. Phone calls can happen while they're out walking, maybe. Video calls, you get an awful lot more feedback in terms of body language and what can you see, how are they doing? Be careful not to over communicate. Although I'm saying schedule it all in, actually, I think what people are finding is that they're spending their entire day on Zoom calls or team meetings rather than actually getting the work done. Now, some team members may need that, so ask them. Others won't. And we do as managers need to flex around the needs and the wants of our team just as much. It's about getting that right balance. And maybe it's about something as simple as, if you have got a day full of meetings, how about making them 50 minutes rather than an hour? And then by the end of the day, all those 10 minutes will add up. You've got an extra hour to go out and have a walk. It's also the manager's responsibility to communicate what's happening with the business. And I think the more transparent we can be, the better. When there is a void of communication, people fill it with negativity. That is a human trait. Be as transparent as you possibly can. Everyone is adapting. Everyone is finding new ways. We need to be transparent when we don't know something. We need to be transparent about some of the slightly more negative messages that perhaps we need to convey. But by being transparent, you'll build trust, and you'll also ensure that they're not filling it with something more negative than what the reality is. Now, I just want to point to one particular aspect of communication, which we call weak tie communications. And this has dropped, obviously. These are the kind of spontaneous bumping into you, da-da-da-da. And there's definitely the thought that the cultures that are going to stand out are those that are able to find a way of creating links with people who don't necessarily need to meet on a Zoom call. So it's perhaps people who wouldn't necessarily communicate with different departments, perhaps in levels of the hierarchy that they wouldn't necessarily talk to. And that is a challenge, but it's worth it, because we know that creativity exists by violating the hierarchy, by talking to people from different standpoints in different departments. So don't lose the spontaneous bump into you over the coffee pot, the canteen, because those meetings and those conversations also matter. And that's a tough one, but it's definitely worth considering. Now, I just want to say that, you know, we know there are going to be redundancies in many businesses, and it's an inevitability, but it does impact. I'm only going to mention employees and managers. It does impact people very, very negatively, more often really because of the uncertainty that it causes. And in the Gallup survey I mentioned, there are 4 universal needs that followers have of leaders. It's stability, this idea of certainty, hope, trust, and compassion. So even if you are a manager who's having to make people redundant, if you could remember those 4, it will stand you in good stead with the employees who are behind. Also, you know, a note to you as managers who are potentially making people redundant, an incredibly unpleasant thing to have to do. It's about making sure that you are prepared so that you don't feel guilty about the process. You know, this is an inevitability. And if you've gone through the appropriate measures in deciding who is to be made redundant, then that guilt does not need to exist. I would always advocate you measure. So really important that you measure what is going on, that you create processes, whether that is regular check-ins, both as individuals, so people can tell you how they're feeling, but also within the team as well. But what policies have you got in place? Do you need to read up on some of the policies that you have so that you know you can support people with whatever is in those policies, whether it's flexible working, sick leave, your employee assistance program? They are notoriously badly used. People just don't use them. Well, they are there to be used to support employees. And critical is the communication from senior leadership as well. Make sure they are very, very visible within the organization. So you as a leader, but also your senior leader as well, particularly on the transparency on the state of the business. But just a word on you as a manager. It's a very tough job to do, often described as the squeezed middle manager. You are possibly the most pressured at work with excessive workloads. You're responsible for the well-being of your team, but also, not great statistic, but well-being across the lifespan dips middle age. It actually tails off as soon as you start working, unfortunately. The good news, it picks up after retirement. So as soon as you retire, all things will be better. But very seriously, do look after yourselves, as well as making sure that you're looking after the well-being and getting the best out of your team as well, because you are vulnerable to poor well-being in just the way as anybody else. And if you fit this age bracket, then please, employ you to look after yourselves. The statistics around this are just frightening. The most common cause of long-term absence is mental ill health. That has really shot up as more and more people are disclosing it. So 43% of absenteeism is stress and mental ill health. And anxiety and stress has increased during COVID. So it would be unheard of for this not to be in your team. A tool that you could look at is HSE stress management standards, a really, really good tool. If you manage those standards well, then actually you can avoid the emphasis of potential mental health problems, but you can also avoid as well. So I'd encourage you to look at HSE's website for that. Some statistics, just briefly, to really emphasize just how much of a problem this is for us. So mental ill health is now being attributed to up to 45 billion pounds per year for the UK PLC. So it is a significant issue for us, on one that unfortunately is not going to be going away anytime soon, particularly because of COVID. So something to be really mindful of. This is a direct hit on bottom line. We need to look after our well-being of ourselves, but also of our employees. So I'm just going to quickly, to finish off, go through what are known as the 5 ways to well-being, plus a couple of others. They were developed from a global study in 2008, and it was looking at what can we do to improve our well-being ourselves, take responsibility for it. So a big factor in lockdown has been loneliness, and studies have been done in the US that says loneliness is as bad for our health as heavy smoking, and actually increases the likelihood of mortality by 26%. It is significant. So all this idea of connecting in is vital. And so if cameras are going off, then it is a please will you put your camera on. I think we need to be quite strong that when we are connecting in with our employees, we know how they're feeling. And if it happens on a consistent basis, it's about reaching out to that person individually if it's happening in the team environment. Be active. I think it's a lot easier now with no commutes to be very, very static every day. But we know that it's absolutely vital for our well-being. So I would encourage you personally and also your team. And maybe that means taking some of your meetings onto a phone call and going for a walk instead. It's better than taking tablets for mild to moderate depression. So it is a significant way of warding off poor well-being. Take notice. Yes, this could be described as mindfulness, but it could just be about taking a break and a rest. Our global attention span is massively narrowing, markedly in the last 15 years. So I'm going to ask you final question to get you involved on Menti is what do we think the average attention span is? And by that, we're talking about the time you can concentrate on one task before you become distracted? Is it 8 seconds, 18 seconds, or 18 minutes? Okay, I think we've got enough of a majority there. It's actually 8 seconds. So unfortunately, that's less than a goldfish. Interestingly, the most marked decrease was around about the introduction of the smartphone. So that tells you a lot. This was discovered in a global study done out of Denmark in 2018. 8 seconds before we're distracted onto something else. We've got a lot more content that is distracting us. It exhausts our attention. We've got a desire for constant newness. Our world, really, because of the digital world, our world is oversaturated with contents, tweets, push notifications, ads, Facebook posts, LinkedIn. We crave more and more new information, and this is causing a massive lack in attention span. Now, that's not good news when you look at just how often we're accessing this information. So the average web page user will read about 28%, more likely 20% of a page. An office worker will check their email box 30 times every hour. I mean, that's colossal. And the average user picks up their mobile phone 1,500 times a week. Are you one of these people who's got your mobile phone stuck to your hip, potentially? The guys know what they're doing. 12 million Twitter users follow 64 or more Twitter accounts. 1.5 million follow 511. People spend 700 billion minutes on Facebook every month. Facebook users install 20 million apps every day. These are all distractions. Can we take just a little bit of time out of our day to almost detox our brain? And you will be amazed at the creativity and the problem solving that happens if you're able to download from your brain and have greater clarity. So I thoroughly recommend that. Give is a rather lovely one, sounds a bit fluffy, so let me ground this in some science. Excuse me. Practicing kindness can promote psychological changes in the brain. Your brain chemically changes. The serotonin and dopamine are known as the happy hormones, whereas negative emotions like anger and jealousy actually will have a different physiological change in the brain. So we'll see a stress hormone, we'll see cortisol, and obviously an overload of cortisol will weaken our immune system and make you put on weight. It reduces down the metabolic rate. So there is physiological changes that are happening. Now, what's really lovely about Give is if you create happiness in someone else, actually the impact that it has on you is amplified. So this could literally just be a compliment. It doesn't have to be any great gesture of kindness. It could literally just be a compliment or a smile. So have a think about the power that you have literally by giving someone the gift of kindness. And then the last one of the 5 is keep learning. So this idea of setting goals, very much for adult learning in particular, has a strong association with well-being. Just think back to when you learn how to ride a bike, that feeling of going without your stabilizers. That doesn't change. You're just not riding a bike without stabilizers anymore. It's something different. So it doesn't have to be a massive learning a new language, but be curious about the world and keep learning. I wouldn't be a well-being expert if I didn't talk about sleep. It's one of the most important factors when it comes to well-being, and yet it's the one that we seem to have the least control over, unfortunately. But it is worth having a look at how to improve sleep by having a good sleep hygiene. It disrupts our mood, our thinking, our learning, our concentration, our vigilance, our memory, our reaction times. It's even a diagnostic tool for mental health conditions. So I would encourage you to just think about how much sleep you're getting and how you might be able to improve the quality of your sleep as well. It's a very active state, sleeping, so we need it. The scientists used to think that we would shut down when we go to sleep. That's not the case. About the last 60 years, scientists have discovered that actually in sleep, our brains are very active, sometimes more active than in the wake state. And they know that because the brain uses more oxygen and glucose in particular sleep cycles. So it's about making sure that you have a dark room, that you don't have caffeine after a certain time, that you're not at a screen 5 minutes before you go to bed, that you're not going to bed with a full stomach. You know, all of these things. Have a think about how you might be able to affect a better sleep pattern. And then just finally, it's all right talking about well-being, and now I've sort of given you loads and loads of tips of, you know, how to look after your employees in your team, how to look after yourself. The best thing you can possibly do is create habits with these, particularly because this is a new normal. So 40% of what we do in a day is made up of habits. So can we put more of the good stuff into those habits? You know, we don't decide in the morning, oh, I'm not really in the mood to clean my teeth. We just do it. Brush my hair. Well, not every day, especially not working from home. But can we put more into the routine and the habits of the day, which are really, really good for us? And they do say that to create a habit, you know, it can take up to 2 months to create a new habit before it becomes automatic. So we do have an opportunity to create new habits, 66 days to be exact. So it's small steps at a time. It's not forcing yourself into a new pattern, because you will fail and then have the shame and then not bother and give up. So if you've got 66 days, what are you going to do on day one? What's the one thing you can do for yourself? What's the one thing that you can do for your team today as day one of a new habit? So I hope that's been helpful. We have 10 minutes to do some questions. I will stop sharing so I can have a look at Q&A, I hope. Let's have a look. Here we go. Right. Show question list. Let's see if I can make this work. I've got some tech issues in there, Gemma and Bryony, but I don't have any questions as yet. Are you seeing any?
Hi, Eileen, it's Gemma.
Hello.
Hello. We haven't had any questions in as of yet into the chat, but if anyone wants to add any in, now's the time to do it. You may have answered all their questions through your excellent presentation.
That's comprehensive. Great.
If anyone's got any comments on anything or how they've found it, that would be fantastic as well. Just feel free to drop a message into the chat. Oh, we've got a few
going up now.
Here. Thank you, Emily.
A few positive comments there. That's really good.
Well, it's been a fascinating gallop through how to manage teams. We might have a question. We've got a question from Andy Hamilton come up. Can you see that, Eileen?
Hold on.
Scoot. Andy, as many construction workers. Oh, good. Oh, that's clever. As many construction, are there any tips good? Yeah, I mean, gosh, a very vulnerable group. So I think, yeah, the difference is that they are more vulnerable because of the fact that they are deemed to be key workers. And I think it's about, you know, one, sharing gratitude for that. But I think it's about being more mindful of the fact that they may need more support. One of the other things I would say as well, what statistics do tell us, is that there is an absolute definite and rather unfortunate statistic around, so in that inverted bell curve that I showed you, those who are most vulnerable are men. So I'm going to make the assumption, because the demographics and the data tells us, that the male construction workers are incredibly vulnerable to mental ill health. And one of the reasons for that is because of shift work, because it's a high risk job. They are more at risk because of that. And also because men don't talk. And I am making generalizations because it is proven through statistics. And so I think we need to proactively communicate to this group, so we're creating a very open space for them to tell us how they feel. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is to normalize it. So one of the things I always encourage clients to do is find examples within the workforce who are willing to open up and talk. And the more senior that person can be, the better. Because you suddenly normalize the fact that, yeah, we can talk about the fact that we don't always feel okay. Of course we don't feel okay. The world has just turned upside down. So, without being too alarmist, I just want to say this is a very, very construction workers, key workers, men, middle-aged, they're a very vulnerable group. Please do make sure that you check in with them and give them a very safe space to communicate how they might be feeling. I'm just seeing what about any tips for introducing furloughed staff back to work. Thank you. Yeah, I think you've got a couple of different things here. Whilst I was rather jealous of people who've been furloughed at the beginning, but I was only hearing how people were sort of taking walks and doing lots of exercise. Actually, for the majority of people, being furloughed has been a very negative experience. That lack of connection. So I think it's actually a reinduction into the workforce. It's not as simple as in open the door, come back. I think there needs to be a considered approach about bringing them back in, but also be mindful of the fact that those who weren't furloughed have actually probably taken on more work as a result of their furloughed staff not doing their roles, not doing their jobs. So you've got one of the things that really, really impacts well-being in the workforce is this idea of injustice. It's not fair. So you've got people who have been on potentially 80% pay, and then you've got people who have been on 100% pay, but the ones who've been working have been flat out and stressed and overworked. So you've got two sets of groups, those who have been furloughed and are coming back in, and those who've actually been overworking. So it's about being very mindful. They've been in very different places. How do we now bring them back together? So a very proactive response to that. And I think it's about almost having a reinduction. How to bring in, yeah, when all working remotely. I've heard quite a few people say that they have brought new members of staff in. And I think, yeah, I mean, in a way, I think this is actually going to become quite a new norm. And I think it's about making sure that when you communicate in a team, you take an opportunity to get to know each other as people. Because if you can imagine that kind of walk around that you do when someone joins a business, you always have a teeny bit of that personal banter chat at the beginning. Don't lose that. Is it about either a dedicated meeting that is just about personal stuff? I had a meeting recently, which was, we were all talking about books. It was kind of a book club with a work environment. Whatever it takes. I mean, I can come up with lots of different ideas of how you just get to be people together in a social setting, whether that's a wine tasting, a book club, or a pub quiz. If you've got new members of staff, I think that's a really, really important thing to do. It might just be about, if you've not got too many people, just all getting together and having a morning coffee on a Friday or a beer at 4 o'clock on a Friday, because those people are going to feel very isolated. They need to know who they belong to and who the characters are within their team. Self-shooting. Yeah. I do think, when you have been faced with lots and lots of challenges, from overwork, work intensification, trying to handle children, etc., to then think other people have literally just been sat about. I think the fear of potential redundancy, which we know is very real, lockdown, the isolation. I've told you the statistics around loneliness; they are very, very real. Actually, and I've gone through this emotion myself. God, I wish I'd been furloughed. Actually, I think it's now looking like that was probably not as much fun as everyone thought it was. And I think it's about showing the reality of what it's been like to be furloughed, and opening those transparent forms of communication as well. Yeah, there is resentment, and maybe it's about, I mean, by all means, share the statistics. 81% of people are frightened they're going to get made redundant, and there are lots of examples of companies who have realised they don't need as many employees as they thought they did. Some businesses are completely pivoted and gone online, and they're getting rid of an awful lot of staff. So I think there needs to be, one of the things I always encourage is when you don't give people an opportunity to talk in a formal way, so you create formal forms of communication, they'll talk anyway. So don't let chat happen by chance, because it will go underground. So give people an opportunity to air how they feel. It is the best way. If they are telling you how they feel, you can manage it. If you're not giving them that opportunity, then you can't manage anything. Those feelings are all very, very valid. So I think it's about creating those opportunities to be honest, and obviously not a space where they can be getting at each other, but where they can actually hear other people's challenges and stories of actually what was it like to be self-shielded? What was it like to be furloughed? And then they might get the reality of the situation, not anywhere near as positive and rosy as they perhaps thought it was. Philip, will we get the slides? Yes, I believe you will.
Right. That's probably a prompt for me to chip in. Thank you very much, Eileen. It's been absolutely fascinating. The comments that are coming up are all very, very positive. Yes, you will get the slides. Yes, you will. Well, you will be able to log on and have another look at the presentation as well. It's all been recorded, as I said earlier. But there's also another opportunity to hear Eileen speak. We have a Seeker event, a Seeker Inspiring Change event organised for the 20th of August. And Eileen and others will be speaking at that. So if you want to make a note of that, please do so, but you will automatically be receiving something, an email at some point or another about it in any event, as you've already logged into this event. So you'll get notification of that. I'd also like to thank my colleague Gemma, who has been in the background sorting out any problems that anybody's been having with sound and answering their questions and looking after the moderating the chat and all the rest of it. She's absolutely crucial to this because she's the one that knows how to do it all. So thank you to her, but particular thanks to Eileen. It's been absolutely fascinating. I hope you've all gone away with lots and lots of tips. I know somebody said that they're going to share with their colleagues. Please do so. Please give them the link or ask them to get in touch with us if they want to hear more. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.